All right, so let's do this again. So this is going to be a regular thing where if I have questions from students or if I'm digging into work and I'm seeing patterns, I'll go ahead and continue to try and answer questions or respond to patterns I'm seeing for students in this inquiring minds style thing. So let's see. With this, the next question we have is, what do you believe is the most valuable asset you have the potential of gaining from the college experience? So that's layered, and that's really the most important thing. Like if we're looking at college success. So, like, or so there are it really depends on who you are. Let's jump into it. So, an asset's something that you gain, right? So most valuable asset means what's the biggest gain that you have from the college experience. Uh, there is direct knowledge in an area that you're interested in. There is the discipline it takes to succeed in college is something that can't be shifted, can't be ignored. The regular, consistent practice of pushing yourself to get stuff done and become more efficient. And so I don't know that and just learning how to learn. And there are other ways and places that can happen, but the college environment is designed to teach you how to learn and is designed to push people into taking responsibility for their own learning. And that's the big thing. So I think, while the college degree gets challenged sometimes, and education in general gets challenged sometimes, I'm someone who I worked off and on 5 years at McDonald's as shift managers at a couple different McDonald's. I worked 9 years construction and did inventory control, and then was an assistant yard foreman. I did that while I was getting my bachelor's and my master's. And ultimately, someone's going to learn if they want to learn from any environment. But some environments reward you for learning how to learn. And once you learn how to learn and learn how to be consistent with it and that sort of thing, there's a different way that you approach life when you get into that. And so there's tons of good things. I'll say this. Being in education constantly puts a student in a position to not know what they're doing and to have enough supports to figure it out. So all of life, you don't know what you're doing most of the time. I have a PhD, and most of the stuff I'm leaning into, like, I'm discovering as I go. And I've got a wealth of knowledge and background in certain types of problem solving, but I get into environments and problems and situations on a daily basis that I have no idea how to solve this. Like, I didn't go through a training course to solve this specific problem. And so it creates a certain amount of flexibility, things like growth mindset, that kind of thing. And so I'd say the biggest asset is feeling comfortable not knowing and recognizing that it doesn't matter whether you know or not, you have to figure it out. If you can't figure out the chemistry, you fail the class, you don't pass the test. If you can't figure out how to write an essay, you fail the class, you don't pass the test. If you can't figure out how quadratic equations work, you fail the class, you don't pass the test, whatever it is. And so, you have to be comfortable not knowing and figuring out when a problem shows up. So I'd say that's probably the biggest asset. That took too long because there's tons of stuff with college and I had to work myself into valuing things. There's tons of other really great things that come from having a college degree, especially if you do it right. So learning how to learn is a huge thing. Learning how to be comfortable not knowing and still problem solving and critical thinking, huge things. Next question. Knowing what you know now, if you could go back to 21-year-olds, what piece of advice would you give yourself? Well, I tell people all the time, all kinds of advice targeted to who they are. So that's a challenge because I'm a weirdo. And so if I were talking to me at 21, there are things that come up in my class, and sometimes this is an overshare, but I grew up without a dad. I really struggle holding on. I really struggle with having mentors often be present in my life in the first place. I've had a handful of really good present ones, even if they were, crusty bulldog Marine sergeant kind of guys, they still were like, well, no one else is going to do this. Come here. You need to learn some stuff. And some of those sorts of things have been really valuable. the biggest advice, and I think I cover this in chapter 1 or 2 of my new textbook, Holistic Writing for Healthy Writers. But the big thing is, don't be afraid to ask for help or take help. It's a pride thing to not take help when it's offered. It's also, like I had the problem of not asking for help because I was worried I was going to bother people and I didn't know who to ask help of. Sometimes it's hard to know who's in your life who you can ask for help from, or ask for help on what. You just get used to surviving. So if you've got people in your support system around you and you don't know who to ask for help, like look for the resources who are around you and just start trying to draw out the knowledge and expertise and life experiences. Even if you don't agree with the stories they tell or their conclusions, you can gain from their experience by just getting people talking about how they lived, and what worked for them and what didn't, or what they think might work for other people. And so being willing to take the time and listen to people who are older than you, even if you don't agree with everything they say, or just being willing to go out and say, if I'm bothering someone, I'll have to trust that they'll let me know. But I don't want to cut off a potential resource because I'm worried I'm going to bother someone. I remember doing that a lot. So because a lot of times what I've discovered over 20 years, or if the question was from 21, so what I've discovered over the 18 years since I was 21 is there are a lot of people who want to help younger generation but don't know how, and are afraid that they'll be seen as imposing or commanding or forcing, or instead of just coaching. And there are other people who overdo it, and usually it's the ones who are kind of shy about it, who are probably better equipped to coach. But you take mentorship where you can get it sometimes. Don't get into unhealthy mentorships, though. That's not good. If someone's constantly putting you down and telling you're just not enough, like that's not going to end well. It should be good, healthy mentorships. But in my experience, there are people who legitimately want to help others, but don't know how to get started helping others, and don't know how to put them, like they don't feel like they're cool enough to hang out with an 18-year or 20-year-old. And so then or they're so focused on like who they are and their generation, and they're distracted. But if someone comes up to them and asks them questions, they'll respond. And if you ask them to go for coffee, they'll go for coffee. If you ask them to go out for breakfast or meet, or just have a 10-minute phone conversation. The important thing, if you're doing that, is one, do it. Don't not ask for help. Always ask for help. If you think someone has a little bit more knowledge than you, that's more than you have. And so always seek out advice. Ask the questions you need to ask. That's the big thing. The other thing is just be real practical. Like, it's not the end of the world if you're be flexible and practical, which means if you're aiming at something and your focus change it, if the best thing you can do, like this is more college major thing. So if you're in college or whatever path in life you're trying to figure out, if you run at it full force, you're going to figure out it's right or wrong faster. So if you're going in the wrong direction, you're going to find that out by going in the wrong direction. You'll hit the dead end faster if you go full bore. What some people do is they're like, they get into indecisive mode. Instead of committing to a path, they spend this time like trying to decide what they're doing, but they don't commit. And so they don't really get a full experience of what it's like to do that thing fully. And so they kind of float around and change majors 3 or 4 times. So those are the two things: is don't always ask for mentorship, ask for help, ask for advice. You don't have to agree with all of it. Don't take it as gospel truth or whatever. And then be flexible and practical. So do what you need to do to get where you need to go and survive without stomping on other people. Like, stay loving and kind. But be flexible enough to pivot. And if you have a goal and it changes, if you get somewhere and you suddenly realize this isn't really who I want to be or where I want to go, it's okay to pivot. It's not the end of the world. And you're going to do that a handful of times, even without trying. So you might as well just lean into it, go full bore, do excellent work in whatever area you're studying. And if you need to pivot, you will. All right. Those are those 2 questions. What's next? 2 questions from earlier in class. These are more linguistically oriented. What really is syntax? And do other languages practice writing in the methods American English writers do? So, what really is syntax? From a linguistic standpoint, it's the structure of phrases and sentences. That's the simple answer. So, the things when people learn about grammar in grade school, syntax is the structure of your sentence or your phrase. Now, in other videos, I talk about prescriptive versus descriptive. This comes up a lot. You can analyze and see the structure of someone's sentence without telling them it's wrong. But syntax is there, and you use common patterns to make your sentences more clear. So the simple short answer is syntax is the structure of sentences and phrases. So it blends the linguistic and the structural. So that's all I'm really going to say about that. I have another video, I think, on syntax, and I'm probably going to make some videos in the next year about like specific grammar things like commas and stuff, because I have a way of doing that makes it a little easier. But remember that syntax is about clear sentences, and there are patterns to syntax, like if you have prepositional phrases and you're stringing a bunch of them together, that's going to make an unclear structure and it's going to be confusing. But different languages have different expected sentence structures, and so I do talk about that somewhere in one of my linguistics videos. Do other languages practice writing the methods American English writers do? That's a big question. Yes and no. There are different ways to practice writing. There are preferred genres in cultures and environments. And so while, in the same way that predominantly a culture may have certain cultural values that lean into different type of rhetorical patterns, and that's been studied under like contrastive rhetoric and intercultural rhetoric since like the 1960s or 70s. Some of that's kind of and some of it's solid, good comparisons. Like Yul Connor does great work, and in the early 2000s and late 90s, I think. And there's more with like translingual writing and that kind of thing, though it's shifted more to like that. Like sometimes it's more creative writing only, where you're just crossing languages or code switching. But as far as big picture writing practices, like people still write, people still do essays, people still try and discover. The Western culture does lean into composition in a way that other cultures don't. But I just did a book review in 2023 on some research, on an edited collection of research south of the equator, if I'm remembering correctly. And so that was a really fun read. Some of it was in Portuguese, some of it was in Spanish, some of it was in English. And I had enough Spanish to get it. And then I was like, oh, this Portuguese thing looks like Spanish, but I did use a translation program for that to make sure that I was getting closer to understanding. But that was new for me to experience the research in multiple languages. So there is research on practices that writers do in other cultures. There's tons of it. And so some of them are the same. And so it depends on the practice. Whatever the case, things like writing process still matter. Things like writer identity and how they view themselves in the language they're writing is important. There's also cool things in like multilingual writing, like Bilingual Selves by Anita Pavlenko, if I remember correctly. Like is a cool read as far as like the psyche of a writer and like what they go through if they're writing in languages other than they grew up in. So the short answer is yes and no, which is kind of lame. Sorry. But basic things like, does my writing have a purpose and do I connect to audience? Those sorts of things are always happening. If you're in a specific culture with specific cultural values, some cultures or some contexts may want you to, for instance, not lead with a thesis statement in the first. They don't want you to lead with your argument. They take more of a Rogerian approach, where you show that you understand the context first, and that you understand counter arguments, other arguments, and other contributing factors first, and then like halfway or 2/3 of the way down, you're going to add your take on it, because you're developing credibility and showing you're knowledgeable about the context before you jump in. And so Western rhetoric, kind of based on Aristotle, is this more like draw them in, get the story told, jump straight into the argument, and start lining up your arguments. But not all cultures work that way. Traditionally, it had this like, it's not really a great way of framing it, and it's not meant to be prescriptive, but the idea that some writing context, whether it's a specific culture or otherwise, some writing contexts call for a direct line attack on when you're dealing with argument, and others do prefer the more story-oriented narrative that kind of circles, and then others kind of zigzag, come back over, repeat, and roll back over. All of these are rhetorical practices that are contextualized, and we don't want to like essentialize a whole people group or culture by saying it's them. So I'm going to stop on that one there. Tons of research. I can talk more about that in too much detail. That's part of the reason why I'm stopping myself. Okay. Someone asked, am I doing the collage assignment correctly? What's your favorite Star Wars movie? So I'll have to go and confirm their work first before I can answer their collage question. But collages are traditionally a bunch of images that come together on a poster or slide. And I do ask that people use pictures and that sort of thing, and label those pictures and cluster those pictures. If you're doing that and you're playing with the visual design, the image options to crop, rotate, overlap, play with label styles and that sort of thing. If you're playing with it and exploring the technology on that collage assignment that I assign, you should be golden. But I'll go double check. I'll double check your work. What's your favorite Star Wars movie? I'm going to get in trouble with this. I have heard so many rants about Star Wars as in my role as faculty advisor for the D&D club, when we're just kind of hanging out. Like we've spent 40 minutes just after a game was done. We played for 3 hours, and then everybody just hanging around talking about Star Wars and Clone Wars and the movies and the cartoons and everything else. I'm a sucker for a good story. And I at first, the original Star Wars movies, they're fun, but they're not my favorites. But that doesn't mean I don't like them. But I do think sometimes when on the ones, especially that George Lucas leaned in on, to nerd out on you, is I feel like from a writing standpoint, the characters are there to build the world because he's got some fun world building. And so I think in the first three, like that came out in the 60s, 70s or whatever it was, don't judge me. I grew up more on Star Trek than Star Wars. That's part of the problem. But I don't think we get as much character. Like the actors make the character, right? So Layla's made because the actress did a good job with that, right? But I think they are a little one note written as they are. When they were written, they were a little more one note, and we get a little more of that big world, epic world, which I do enjoy, but I don't feel like the plot is as like meaningful. I liked 4, 5, and 6, which came out when I was a teenager and beyond. I waited to watch all of them, so I didn't see any of them till I was like 17, till the 6th movie came out, because then I binge watched them in order as best I could at the time. And so I realized this is just life. I really, honestly, I like the Kylo Ren Daisy storyline. I like the arc. I think that they do a good job cinematography wise, and I don't care about some of the plot point losses. I enjoyed those storytellings better, maybe just because I like the main character better than I did Luke. Sorry. And I always felt like Layla was a bit more spoiled until she grew up, for better or worse. If I have to part of it, you can say which one I like best by the ones I'm most likely to rewatch. So I'm most likely to rewatch, what would it be? Episode 4, where they find Anakin, because I like Qui-Gon Jinn. He's fun. I'm more likely to watch the first one, where Luke's discovering. I kind of forget what the second and third one are. And then any of the ones with Daisy, I'm willing to rewatch. And so those ones are the ones I'd lean into as favorites. But I'm really I'm not like taking a critical lens to them, and I'm not worrying about world building and connection or cohesiveness of, lore, which I know some people really like. So don't judge me. All right. That was easier and harder than I thought it was going to be. All right, digging back into deeper things. This student says, does college ever get any easier, and how will this affect me in life or help me generally? I'm assuming college. So college gets easier, just like anything else. The more you do it, the easier it gets. You develop habits and strategies for success. So that means that the first semester or first of anything is always the hardest, but you're laying foundations and patterns, which is why it's so important to take the time you need to for in your first semester to lay the foundations, develop the habits, develop the good ways of the growth mindset thinking in that first semester, and get out and architect your life. Practice architecting your life rather than putting out fires. Develop good habits, and that will make college easier. Otherwise, you put out fires enough and you get good at putting out fires, but you architect your life enough and you have much less fires and you're better at thinking forward. One of the challenges is, and this comes from cognitive science, is that as people age, they get better about thinking toward the future. But if I'm remembering the research right, it's something like the average 15-year-old thinks 1 to 3 weeks out life-wise, if they're lucky, if they're developed. And the average 35-year-old is thinking 3 to 6 months out. And the average 50-year-old is thinking 6 months to 5 years out. So, and there's some scaling and individuation and that sort of thing. But the bottom line is the sooner you can start thinking forward 4 months and say, does the thing I'm doing make me successful in 4 months when it's harder or when it gets into crunch zone or whatever it is, the sooner you can do that, the better you'll succeed. College gets easier because you develop habits just like any other environment. You become proficient and expert in the doing of that thing. You get better at using Canvas. You get better at learning to go to office hours. You get better at using the resources the college has for you, tutoring, disability resources, counseling, whatever it is. You get better at talking to your boss about scheduling and making sure it doesn't conflict instead of kind of letting yourself be pushed over or just saying, I can't work at all. You find a way to balance that out. Some of those lessons come through lots of pain if you don't think ahead. It comes through what I did my first semester of college. I lost a $4,000 a year scholarship. I basically had a 4-year, $4,000 scholarship that would have covered all of my tuition and books, or 80, 90% of it from an honors college at UT Arlington. And I lost it because I was supposed to work 30 or 35 hours because I had to pay bills. And about halfway through the semester, it's like I started doing work. I worked hard at when I was at McDonald's, and I was just hourly wage, but I'd get there, I'd do secondary duties, I'd make sure I wipe down stuff, I'd be trying to help people and try and do a good job. And people would be like, we like having you here. Can you come in and cover this person's shift? They can't be here, blah, blah, blah. And so you get used to being liked in that work environment. And so I ended up working 45, 50 hours by the end of the semester, failed a class, didn't meet the GPA requirement for my scholarship, and done. So yeah, I kept going to college for 3 years, but I have a little bit more student debt than I'd like, though I didn't take it till the second or third year. I tried to work through it and pay it, but it was hard. And it was more expensive than a community college for sure. And I didn't have as much family help, right? So that's how it goes. So it gets easier because you learn how not to do things, and sometimes through much pain. Learn and architect your life instead of put out fires. Plan a month, 2 months, 3, 4 months out. Go to counselors, go to the advisors, plan your schedule, get it locked in, talk with your bosses, talk with your parents and support and best friends and all those in your support system, and architect your life to succeed in the goals you have. How will this affect me in life or help me? So how does college affect me in life or help me? College is stressful, just like anything worth doing is. It's an investment. It's an investment of time, energy, money, all of that. And it's not just an investment for you. You're saying, I believe I will gain value in this thing, so I'll do it. And whether that's through the degree or which is why some people focus on grades. I get good grades, I get a degree, I get a better job. What people are really looking for, the degree helps. The degree shows that you could commit to something and do a good job or do a sufficient job. And it means that you theoretically have requisite skills of problem solving, getting stuff done, and handling your business across 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, whatever it is. That's why when it's on your resume, it's a good thing. There were people who there are major businesses, Forbes businesses. There was, I think it was Forbes or Wall Street Journal that put out an article in the last 6 months about people had tried to, they were worried that having certain degrees might have been leaving out people from their hiring pool by requiring a certain degree level. And they ended up like 5, 10 years later realizing, no, we're going back because we're not getting better hires and we don't like how it's going. Like ultimately, it was a better hire, generally speaking, if they had certain degrees. And there's character development aside from general learning, problem solving, and awareness of the world. So those things all happen. But really, again, and I've said this in other places, if you're focusing on learning and growing and adding value to yourself as you go to college, that's how it helps you, is you are developing value for yourself in the marketplace, even if you don't realize how. Like you learn history, if you just learn it as facts and you don't transfer that knowledge, maybe you don't add as much value. But if you learn history and you learn how to think about history and learn how to draw patterns out of it, and then you go and apply that when you get into the workforce, like that's great. But there's always the need for application. So, keep that in mind. But there are good things, positive things that college can affect you in and help you in. But just like anything else, it's hard. It's okay if it's a hard thing. College can be hard unless you have all the right things in place and someone else is paying for it. And even that, like hard things aren't bad. Hard things are good. And sometimes the hard thing, like this is just what hard feels like when you're tired and you're stressed. And it teaches you how to deal and survive and overcome tiredness and success, or balance your life so that you have just the right amount of sleep deprivation and success, right? And stress. Okay. Hopefully that helped. Those questions are more generic. We're going to move on. They're more like meta questions that are like, do I really have to do this for point? Is it for points? Will I lose points? If I ask you to do it and it's attached to an assignment, you have to do it or you don't get the points. What do you mean by questions about life? Is it just life in general? So some of these are examples of questions about life. So sometimes when I ask students these questions, like give me a question about life or college or something you're dealing with, like there are some people who have a very big issue and they don't know how to solve it. And it helps to have someone say, what are you dealing with? How can I help? And there's an immediate problem they're trying to solve, a fire they're trying to put out, or something that it's just sitting on them, and to be able to ask it. So anything really could be. I've had people ask simple things, just to get to know me. Like we saw Star Wars, that sort of thing, something about content. And also like, how do you survive as a parent going back to school? What is it, what am I going to deal with if I'm 50 and a returning student? How, alternatively, like someone's saying, I'm a dual enrollment student. I'm 16. I'm technically in high school, taking college courses. How, like, is this even good or right? Should I be doing this? Like, and so there's all kinds of things. Other times I'm dealing with a divorce. Any thoughts on that? So I get all kinds of questions about life. It's really, this is the part where, what are you dealing with? You're always welcome to ask me. So if you've got something specific about work, if you're dealing with a boss issue, I've counseled people on how to deal with awkward work situations. It is a rhetorical situation. Feedback's important. Understanding how you're perceived in work is important. And are there things that go beyond your language that you're presenting yourself as? Things like that. So what do I mean by questions about life? All of the above. Okay, let's see. So someone did ask about my late work policy. It should be in the syllabus. If it's not, like that's always the first place. But if you can't find it, it does change a little bit if it's one of my learning communities versus my standalone courses. And I am kind of shifting each semester. I try something a little bit different. So most of the time, I'm not worried about an assignment. You missing one assignment that's like 12 hours late because it was due at midnight and you were just crashed out from work and you needed to rest first before your brain can even function. Not going to bother me. I trust your judgment. I intentionally scatter assignments across the week for my classes, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or whatever, so that you can steadily pace the workout, because you're usually supposed to be doing at least 9 hours in a 16 week course, or sometimes 18 hours of work in a 8-week course. And so my late work policy is don't make it a pattern, and don't let it be more than 12 to 24 hours late, or it might have a penalty. And that can change course by course, semester by semester, and whether I have a teaching partner or not, because I want to maintain consistency within the course. And each of them has their own value and benefit. I generally have a compassionate heart, and I want to support students who need it. Also, what I've found over the years is that when I'm really nice and I'm like, turn it in whenever, that students will take advantage of that, and they will get all of their chemistry assignments or math assignments or history assignments in on time. And I will be left till the end, which means week 10, I get 20 assignments from one student to catch up. And that's not cool for their learning or for me. So that's why I have a little bit of guidance on that. I generally want to support people, and I trust students' judgment about how to balance their workload. So I don't stress over a day or two in most cases, though if I see a pattern of it, I will incur a penalty to help you learn to stop turning in things late as a pattern, because patterns matter. Individual one-off whoopses don't. And sometimes, and I don't want people stressing over, oh my gosh, if I don't have it in by 11:59, they're going to fail me and it's going to be terrible. And then I'm going to have to go and retake this class, because that type of energy is not supportive of success. That's a stress response. And I don't want you having that level of cortisol in your system when you're talking to me. Sorry for anyone who may have dealt with that. Okay. Next one. How do I know if I picked the wrong major or not? Is there such a thing as picking the perfect major? Well, I talked in my other video about how I picked my major, and it's complicated. I started out as an aerospace engineer, shifted to theater performance production, took a couple years off, came back, had a very specific way that I picked my major the last time. And like I said in the same video about 15 minutes ago, you can't go wrong if you try and do something, do it well, and then decide it's not the main thing for you. I like aerospace engineering. I like calculus. I like problem solving. Like I look at trains and motorcycles and spaceships and things and go, that's really cool. My personality is I'm very social, and especially at 18, 19, 20, my ADHD was very kinetic. Like I moved around a lot. I was not good at sitting still, and I still am kind of not. Like if you get me in a meeting, most of my colleagues probably think I'm like constantly anxious or something, because I'm just tapping my legs and stress. Like I have restless leg syndrome. I'm hyperactive. But most of the time I'm just excited, and it's like a dog wagging his tail. It's just kind of like do. We're having a meeting, and I'm hanging out with my cool friends who know stuff. But that being said, at 19, 20, it was hard for me to sit still. And I loved doing calculus and hyper focusing in step by logical step. It's elegant, right? Watch the movie proof of the screenplay. Go watch the theater production of it. It's great. It's cool the way they think about math is elegant. And I get to be math and science adjacent with some of the work that I do, but I'm distracted a little bit. Knowing the things you're interested in and your personality type and what's a good match for you is good. But you can't go wrong if you're thinking about long term, like, does this fit me? And does it fit my personality? Maybe, maybe not. That personality could be a way of doing it differently. But in the moment, maybe I can't figure it out. If I really like it and I think it's the way to go, lean into it. You can the things I see people do. Here's what I'll say before I go there. If you do excellent work, you're going to be fine. If you do excellent work in any area, you'll be fine. If you aim at being in the top 10% performers in any industry, in any environment, it doesn't matter what the major is, you're going to succeed, because that's what excellence does. That being said, someone who is excellent in one area and who may have to put in a lot more effort, and that's really more of a marketing and entrepreneurship mindset. So you have to decide, am I most marketable? Like, I can be excellent in this area with this amount of effort, and I can be excellent in this area with this amount of effort. If I just care about doing a good job, or that sort of thing, it doesn't matter what area I'm in. If I can do the things that make me feel rewarded, it doesn't matter which activity I'm doing, as long as I try and do a good job at it. So if you're trying to be excellent at what you do and learn meaningfully what you're doing, you're going to be fine for the most part. When the thing that people get stuck on is when they try and make the decision about their major for the wrong reasons. If people pick a generic major because they can't think of anything that they care about, they still need to do that major as if it's the thing they care about. So if you're like, oh, I'm going to pick business because I don't really know what else to do, or oh, I'm going to pick accounting because it's a good, steady job, or oh, I'm going to pick computer science because I know there's jobs in that field. You can make practical decisions like that, and that's not wrong, but you have to treat that decision as if that's the thing. And so even if you're not super excited about business or computer science or whatever you choose, you need to treat it as if you're going to do it for the rest of your life, and then determine if you like it or not. Because if you don't treat it that way, you get this half energy engagement that really is like, I'm just waiting for something better to come along. There's a strange parallel that I'm picking up in dating there. So don't do that either, right? It's like half committing to a relationship. Don't do that. So there doesn't have to be a perfect major. And ultimately, nothing's going to get wasted. All of your learning matters if it's authentic learning. All of the things that are growing you are going to matter. It's whether that thing fits and is the thing you need right now or in 5 years. So plan, think, and don't stress it being perfect. Focus on doing a good job at whatever thing you choose. And if you have to shift, you have to shift. One thing to remember with a 2-year degree is there is some focus, like we have guided pathways with targeted classes. But if you get done with an associate's degree, that's a great point to reflect and reconsider and determine whether that, is it, if you're doing science, are you not really like, that's not really the thing you care about. So then you shift into a humanities and suddenly have a humanities degree for a 4-year degree with a science core, or vice versa. Like, it's okay to reevaluate after you've accomplished a key moment. So at an associate's level, you can rethink, once you get if you're aiming at a certificate, get the certificate. Like, don't stop halfway. Like, I stopped 3/4 of the way through a degree. I could have kept going, but I felt like my life had to go in a different direction. And that was for very weird reasons. But yeah, so don't worry about the perfect major. I am a hyperverbal processor. I'm taking a long time to answer these questions, but hopefully it's okay. I probably could have typed out these like short 2 or 3 sentence answers, though they usually come out paragraph length faster. But also maybe not with as much depth or tangential expertise. Let's see. Not that. Not that. No questions there. Oh, wait. That's good. So these are students I already answered questions to who are just like, I'm all good. Don't have questions. Or this was helpful. Question. Okay, here's one. How important is it to be able to blend the knowledge of language in daily life? And why isn't there an agreed upon universal language? Transfer knowledge from an educational standpoint, really important. The ability to blend knowledge of language or anything into different parts of your life, constantly looking for connections across context, is a developed skill that will help you. That's the thing that, like, seeing connections where other people can't will make you better at everything. It will help make you solve problems better. If you can see connections that help solve problems, that's a good thing. In this case, specifically, the blend of knowledge, language into daily life, thinking about how language changes the way we interact in the drive-through, we engage with the people around us, the person at the grocery store, our banker, whatever it is, seeing how language can interact and change that interaction is extremely meaningful. Especially when there are sociocultural norms connected to it. One thing for me, this is in one of my first edited collection book chapters, but I talk about working in a block yard, because I did, and working at McDonald's and seeing the way that people who spoke Spanish but not English would be treated sometimes. And so for me, I always wanted to, I was aware of that language and interaction challenge. And it motivated me to do research in my bachelor's and master's. And it motivated me just in the moment to be kind to that person. Like, I learned Spanish so that I could connect with people. Language is a connector, writing is a connector. The whole point of those things is to make humans interact smoothly, right? So the benefit of learning language, whether it's English, Spanish, or sign language or whatever, is to connect with other humans. So understanding how language can change the dynamic of interaction is extremely meaningful. So keep working on the blend of knowledge. Why isn't there an agreed upon universal language? Tower of Babel. And because for there to be an agreed upon universal language would have to be static and consistent, and it's not. The history of language is complex and messy, and we make up, and the more widespread social media gets, the more language can change and adapt and become the telephone game of meaning, right? Like, there's right now, it's like demure on social media is a thing that was kind of antiquated Jane Austen style, like, oh, they're so demure, a lady, a highbrow lady is demure and calm and that sort of thing. And now it's like they're the demurest, and it means all kinds of things. And sometimes people intentionally change definitions or transform definitions because they've got a rhetorical reason for spinning things. And, everything from, sick being good or that sort of thing as like slang is part of this. We want to rebel, or we want an identity marker for us. We don't want to be exactly like our parents, generationally speaking. So we come up with new language, or someone just says a cool turn of phrase. Maybe they misunderstood the original language and it just transforms it for all the people that they influence. Right. So there can't be a universal language because language is never static and it constantly changes. And people interact with language like our language comes from everything we connect with. If we connect with different things than someone else, their language is made up of something different. So what we want is healthy communication that allows for feedback and response and clarification. The issue with the universal language is not so much that we can't all speak the same thing. It's that we aren't practicing listening and understanding. So we don't need a universal language if we're taking the time, slowing down to say, let me make sure I understand what you mean. I hear you saying this. Do you mean that? Or am I missing some part of what you're describing? Because I want to make sure I understand you and what you care about. Okay. That's almost all the questions I think I have for today, but let's click through. Okay, let's see. One of the last sets. I hope they say my first question. Actually, no, I already did that one. What am I saying? That's an old one. So, a couple questions regarding the upcoming writing process draft. The thing that we'll be writing about is what's confusing me. Are we writing about what we see on the front or back of daily things in our home or a significant time in our lives? And if that's what we're writing about, how are we going to make that into an essay? Okay. So right now my students are doing a collage that turns into, many of my students are doing a collage that turns into a Where Writing Finds Me essay. So what they're doing is they're documenting pictures of things in their daily life, from their car to workplace to home, that kind of thing. Any writing examples at all, they're taking pictures of, putting into a collage. And sometimes it can be confusing because people want to get kind of metaphorical with it. So sometimes people will go and like, here's a picture of my trip to Lake Havasu, and let me tell you the story of my trip to Lake Havasu. And that's not really the purpose of the assignment. Like, you could give me a picture of Lake Havasu, but you've got to it's got to be it's examples of writing. So unless you're going to say like, oh, there's a divine creator who made this beautiful landscape and they wrote a message in Lake Havasu, that's a thing you could try. But that's not really the type of writing we're talking about in most cases. Like, what's the human communication? So I'm specifically looking for words, symbols, and communication examples in your daily life. So that dry erase board behind me, the books on the shelves, maybe specific ones. Even if I'm looking at, even the way my daughter labels her little dragon head, right? And the name of it. So those sorts of things. Actually, do I have and the coffee mug. There's no words on that. Though you could talk about writing as visual design and leave a picture of that, that sort of thing. So you could even get into technical things like this microphone user guide. Those are all examples. You could look at my D&D dry erase cheat board that I keep track of whether monsters are alive or dead. Any of that is actual writing. You could take a picture of a keyboard or something like that. The goal is to grow the awareness of my students by helping them see everywhere writing really does show up and get past the idea that writing is just creative writing or just essays, because writing shows up everywhere, and people invest a lot of time and energy. Companies invest a lot of time and energy into producing writing like this, right? Technical writing to keep them either legally safe or protect them or help users of that product do well. But it could also be the cereal box branding, the little bee, that kind of thing, for Honey Bunches or Honey Nut Cheerios, whatever it is. So, and you can either focus for this project on specific, like the branding side that's more kind of aesthetically oriented and rhetorically oriented toward a particular audience, or the ingredients and technical information of this % of daily value of magnesium or whatever it is. So I would lean away from significant time in our lives type work, because that's more of a literacy narrative or a narrative style. And this is a collage that's supposed to document where writing happens right now. And it's not about telling the story of that writing. It's about recognizing and developing an awareness of writing. And this does come from my approach to writing as writing about writing in the classroom, as opposed to just telling stories generally, though that's a good thing. What I want my students to get better at is understanding how writing works, where it happens, and why it matters. And if using writing, practicing writing is good, but it doesn't necessarily develop experience and expertise in writing, which is what I'm trying to do. So I want us to become more aware of where writing happens beyond just doing an essay about ourselves, and that sort of thing. I am not going to add more to this because some of this I'm going to cover in class for the student next week after we get past the collage. So, yeah. But the way we turn that into an essay, actually, the short version is if you've got 15, 20 pictures of writing in your everyday life and you go, oh, these ones are interesting or weird, I like those ones. And then you choose the weirdest one or two, and then you say, based on what I'm learning in class, this counts as writing because it looks like this. It has, this linguistic component, this structural component, this aesthetic orientation. It appeals to this audience because that kind of thing. You're engaged. That's how the essay turns out. It's a descriptive analytical essay where you describe the writing and say why it matters, how it acts as writing, and tie it to the content of the class. So that's the short version, actually. Cool. Anything else here? I think those are all the questions that I've got there. One came through not through text messages with students, but through Canvas. One was, tell me about a time you experienced exigency in your writing and how it goes. So for those of you who don't know, I do have a video of exigency and kairos. Exigency is why a writer writes right now. Exigency exigence is the emergency situation that must be responded to. So it's what we're reacting to. So in EMT studies and triage in hospitals, they have exigent circumstances. Also in justice studies and police force, that kind of thing. Exigent circumstances, the thing I need to respond to right now. As writers, exigency is the thing that I need that evokes response from me. So it could be a tweet from a president. They're not called that, an X post from a president, or otherwise. It could be a text message from your mom saying, what do you want for dinner tonight? And you have to respond in a timely fashion. It doesn't require a response, but there are reasons to respond. But no response is a response too sometimes. But an exigency is anything that causes a writer to write right now. So something that triggers a need to communicate, even if it's not answering the thing that the person's asking, right? So a time that exigency happened in my writing. So anytime we have deadlines, That's a thing. So, and how did it go? So there have been plenty of times where I had a deadline, and the deadline was the reminder that I needed to write. And so so I had for instance, I tell the story because I got a B in a literature class, and it was in my first semester of college, I think, maybe first or third. But it was like one of the first English classes I took as a college student that I hadn't tested out of, basically. And so I was taking this literature class. I had an essay due. I stayed up 50 hours to get it done because I was working like 12-hour shift and doing college classes. I basically fell asleep in the English class, and I had an essay due like the next night. So I stayed up through the night because there was an exigent circumstance. I needed to respond to the writing prompt about this particular book. And so part of my strategy for responding was to write an essay as best I could in the time I had. I got a B on it, which is funny, considering. And then I went and after I got feedback on it, and the teacher's like, "This thing you used isn't a word." I'm like, "Yes, it is." And so I went. I'm like, "Are you going to give me points back? You were wrong here." And they're like, "No, it's still a B paper." So that's what happens when you try and write an essay the night before, which is one of the reasons I make it a theme in my teaching about PTS writing and in my textbook. But exigency is like all the time. It's a text from my wife saying, can you stop by Target on the way home? I don't answer that. If I don't answer it and I get home and she's like, she might go, and I get a different kind of response. She's like, "Oh man, bummer. We got to go back out. And you were right over there." Blah, blah, blah. Or it's like, I don't answer it, but I pick it up. That's still a response to the exigency. It's just not me writing. It's me responding. So I still go pick it up. I just don't let her know about it. And so what could happen is I leave to go pick it up, and she swings by to pick it up too. And that hasn't happened before, but I can see it working out like comedy of errors style. But that sort of thing. So I'll be like, "Sure, I'll run by there," or "No, that's not on my way." It's just basic communication. We do it every day. So exigency is anything that causes us to write a response or respond to communication. It could be the war in Ukraine may lead someone, not a specific communication, but the fact that it's happening could lead someone to go and say what they think about Russia on social media, or to a friend, or about the news, or whatever. So sometimes we respond to circumstances, not just messages. And so anything that causes us to communicate, or any communication that we respond to in action or word, that's exigency. Okay. With that, I think that's all the questions I've got that I haven't answered yet. So we're just going to call it. So hopefully these end up being useful and helpful for whoever stumbles upon them, and I'll share them with the students and see if they are useful too. So have a good day.